Hello and welcome to Design Impact. My name is Zeerak Ahmed. I'm the co-chair for this year's Design Impact series. We have a truly global program for you today, so global in fact that my co-chair is based in Sydney, Australia, and you joining at 1 a.m. Has recorded some brief opening remarks, and I'll hand it over to my co-chair, Michelle Cramer.
Hi everyone and welcome to this edition of Places Left Behind. This is a webinar series hosted by Harvard's Graduate School of Design Alumni Council's Design Impact Committee. My name is Michelle Cramer, MAUD 99, and together with Zeerak Ahmed, MDE 18, I'm co-chair of the Design Impact Committee. I'm in Sydney, Australia and can't be with you in person due to the challenges of the world clock. In the spirit of Places Left Behind, today I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that gratitude to any First Nations people we have joining us today. For those who may not be aware, Australia's Indigenous community consists of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have lived on this continent for more than 65,000 years, making it one of the world's oldest living cultures. Their understanding of land, sea and sky is one of custodianship, of all that is living from the centre of the core of our planet and all the way up and beyond the stars. It provides a connection for what we do as designers that considers respect, gratitude and a whole of life centred approach. For us at the GSD Alumni Council, Places Left Behind is a passion project with its own magic. It's an initiative that brings together stories from our alumni community who are actively participating in spotlighting and providing some resolution to one of the planet's greatest challenges, inequity. Through this virtual forum, we explore the intersection of spatial design, architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning and policy in addressing inequity and fostering regeneration. After the success of our webinar relaunch last year, we're pleased to present the second in our series. In this webinar, you'll hear from three extraordinary speakers. Firstly, Sekou Cooke, MArch 14, who will explore his work in Selma, home to the 1965 American Civil Rights Marches, and whose residents of today are not figures of a distant history, but an active community with aspirations for a vibrant and inclusive future. Then Stacey Pennington, MAP 05, whose case study of the Makers Quarter, a neighbourhood within the Upper East Village of downtown San Diego, demonstrates a long commitment to urban regeneration through passionate engagement and activation, delivering a returned civic vibrancy. And finally, Cal Brook, MAUD 85, who will share stories of his work supporting young Indigenous designers, restoring Indigenous presence in the fabric of Canadian communities, addressing the question, how can design make a meaningful contribution to truth and reconciliation? I'm also delighted to share that we will have three moderators, Samuel Maddox, MDes 19, PhD 31, and Alumni Council member, as well as student contributors Joseph, MAUD 26, and Eden, MDes 27, before closing remarks are made by Zeerak. Many thanks again for joining us for this webinar series. Now I'll hand over to Sekou, who is our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at. I'll get us started with sharing my screen. So today I'll be talking through some urban design proposals we did for downtown Selma. Selma, Alabama is quite well known in the history and culture of the United States, but it's quite a typical place of left behind. It's left behind in people's memories, left behind by our economy, left behind by many of our social reforms in this country. This is a project that was funded by by the Partnership for Equitable and Resilient Communities in partnership with the City of Selma. And I was doing urban design and architecture work with City Collective. So the history of Selma goes back in our memories to a couple of significant moments. 1865 is probably the first most significant moment to the history of our country. This is the famous Battle of Selma, where it's one of the last stands in the Civil War. And then 100 years later, 1965, it's quite famous for the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge that led to violent responses from the local law enforcement and the harbinger of the Civil Rights Act in the United States. That crossing is celebrated each year in March, what the locals call Jubilee. So each year they reenact the historic crossing. And in 2025, that was the 60th anniversary, and our plan was commissioned to celebrate that commemoration of that 60th anniversary. Of course, it draws a lot of political attention as well. This is a picture from March of 2024 during the presidential campaign. And I wanted to use this picture to pay attention to the large, oversized American flag in the background. That flag was physically draped over the side of this building here, which is at the corner of Water Avenue and Broad Street, right near the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it literally covers up the physical devastation and dereliction that's happening in downtown Selma right now. So the city of Selma has really become a symbol, an image, an idea about social justice, about the Voting Rights Act, but the actual physical infrastructure of the city has been forgotten, and the people of the city have been forgotten. Those people got a little bit more airtime in January of 2023 after a devastating tornado ripped right through the center of the city and displaced quite a number of people, a huge number of homes. So it came back in the top of the media cycle for a couple of months, and that loosened up the pockets of a few administrators and invested some money into the city, and that allowed for some of the work that we did. And so this is the team that was assembled, starting with perk that was an effort put together by Melville Charitable Trust and the City of Selma are the client leaders. And then the design leadership started with Justin Kiernan and Blake Reeves of City Collective, and I was also brought in on the team to help lead the visioning. And our own Joseph Appiah, you can see down at the bottom there, was working for me at the time before his time at the GSD, and was part of that team as well. And here is us crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge at Jubilee. This is our album cover shot. So one of the most surprising things about Selma to me when I first got involved was that it's a much smaller city than we imagine. We can see here that the population back in 1960 was actually 28,000. And today, or 2022, statistics have it at 17,000. So it's a very, very small city. And we wanted to compare it with other cities. So we looked at Montgomery, Alabama, which is about 10 times the size of Selma, though it's only about an hour away. And then another city in Alabama, a comparable sized city in Alabama, which is Phoenix, Alabama, and then comparing it to another comparably sized southern city, Annapolis, Maryland. And you can see the demographic shifts. We just looked at basic shifts in the population, median household income, the unemployment rates, give you a really clear picture that, well, each of these other examples have grown in one way or another. Selma has continued to shrink. So coming in, they started us out with a few basic priorities that they had for us to think through and reimagine for them as part of the commission. One was this multiplex that they had planned. They had some funding for, which they wanted to have a convention center, hotels, meeting spaces, and they created this site. They earmarked this site for that development. And that was based on the available monies and the idea that if you build it, they will come, that if you build a large convention center, then suddenly people would flock to Selma and support their economy. We thought it a huge mistake to put all of those eggs in one basket and actually pull attention away from the core of downtown and off to the side. So we thought of something that would be much more pluralistic, having a hospitality district, an area that included theaters, meeting halls, hotels, a school of hospitality, and a marketplace. Or a food hall that we ended up, and this was based on some historic records that we found of a food hall that used to be there, where locals used to gather and exchange wares, and which is now not part of the fabric. Now that median has disappeared, and it's now just these really wide rights of way for automobiles. The second thing they had was as a priority was to renovate their justice center, renovate their existing police department, add a courthouse there, add a new jail, fire department. Again, the thinking is that they had available funds, federal funding for this work, and citing that in the location of their current city hall and where the current police department is and municipal courthouse. And this more than even more than the multiplex really was a disturbing idea for us coming in because when we think of the police and Selma, these are the types of images that come to mind. So these are images and histories that the residents are well aware of and reminded of, but they arguably wanted to forget about them more than remember them, or you leverage them to bring about real change within their community. So we thought of this, we pivoted here and said, instead of a justice center, we need to be leaning into restorative justice and add a community center, add a way for law enforcement to interact with the local communities to really think through how Selma can become a model for social justice and restorative justice across the nation. So restorative justice centers exists right now where people actually where victims and criminals or persecutors are able to face each other in a open, non-aggressive environment. And these are different ones that have been designed by different people. This one by Design Justice in Oakland of one of our former Loeb Fellow, Deanna Van Buren's company. The third initiative that they had was about downtown tourism, developing a business district down there, which we agreed with and thought about extending that not just to have vendor facilities and retail that again is a build it and and they will come kind of strategy. We had to double down on tourism um, connected to the 1965 march. So we wanted to reinforce the march trail, make sure that that's visible on the ground, and connect that to a greenway and have ways of memorializing some of these events in real memorials on the ground. So here's where those trails start to connect. And you can see where that ends up at the bridge down in the lower corner, and those circles are potential areas for memorials. And river walks are very successful in many different cities. And of course, some of the more memorable memorials recently are attractors for tourism. And the final is about housing. So, housing, as they presented it, really was focused on the devastated areas from the 2023 tornado. You can see here in red all of the affected houses and lots that were affected by that tornado, but those are on the outskirts of the downtown. And we wanted to really focus them on not single family housing, but denser types of housing that are focused more in the downtown. In the second phase of the project, we really focused more on how do we implement some of these strategies, breaking it down into three timelines: short term, midterm, and long term. And then instead of these four primary areas, we had these broader eight goals. And when you intersect those with the timelines, then the projects can start to fill out this grid and see whether they are long-term, short-term, and what community need they answer. Uh, Really focus the housing on the core on Long Broad Street, just near the bridge, understanding the empty lots, the vacant parcels, the unoccupied buildings, and what the ground floor commercial space is used for right now. And again, reinforcing the groundscape, the treescape, the streetscape, and how the memorial walk would interact with that. Before even the shortest term, some of these things we thought could be piloted really quickly, temporarily painting the march route on the street, bringing in a muralist to deal with some of the empty vacant lots and buildings, then using some tactical urbanism pieces to mark things on the ground, have some street trees, and have a temporary food market instead of building the new food hall right off the bat. And so you can see how the longer term things can start to phase in. The streetscapes are first, filling in some of the vacant buildings. Then we can start filling in some of the vacant lots, more permanently do the march route, and then some of the larger projects like downtown, the social justice center and the food hall can start to emerge. And here are some of the final imagery that we produced for Jubilee back in 2025 for the 60th anniversary, and can start to see the potential impacts of this new way of thinking through how downtown Selma can actually start to work. So that's all we have for now, and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Sekou, for that presentation. It was really great to see this project again and how much it's grown and evolved and how much sharper the narrative has also gotten. I think, especially when in your presentation, you really did a great job at highlighting the importance of Selma in the public consciousness of America and its history. I'm kind of curious in terms of how the city and even you as a designer and practitioners envisions that the city can evolve past that history, but also kind of carry it. You sort of pointed out a little bit about how the residents are grappling with that history and in some ways trying to forget it. I guess in your view, what do you think is probably the best way the city can continue to thrive without being held down by a very dark history?
Yeah, this is a question that came up multiple times in each of the times we presented there. Every time we went to Selma, engaged with the mayor or the local governments and the local communities, there was this sense that this history is very dark and they want to move past it, and it's not something that they want to define them. And even in the schools, we found out that a lot of local students don't learn these histories directly from their history teachers. And we made it very clear that internally, these might be very painful histories and things that they don't want to be defined by, but externally, they are already defined by that. Uh, Most people who know about Selma, who've seen the movie that Oprah produced internationally, would imagine that Selma is a much bigger city, takes up much more space on the map. But they'd all be surprised that it's only a city of 17,000 people, and that their major commercial center is the Walmart that is 2 miles away from the bridge from downtown. So without leaning into that history, without leveraging that for their economic well-being, they're just going to continue to be left behind. And we also pointed out how naive it might be to imagine that there's no real that there's a possibility of stepping away from that history when the politicians who come once a year for their biggest economic boom each year are leveraging that history over and over. They're actually exploiting it as much as they can for their own political purposes. So somebody's going to be profiting and taking away from who they are and benefiting or profiting from their history. So our argument to them is why not them?
Yeah, that's really great. And I also want to give the audience a chance to ask questions in the chat if you have any. If not, I just want to ask one more follow-up question to that as well.
Sure. Please.
I think too that sort of this the devastation of the tornado that helped to bring things into the forefront. Um,
Mhm.
and I think given that the webinar is about places left behind, I think without sort of these I guess external forces that can really force public attention, how do you think that cities and some position where cities that might have had either economic relevance or historical relevance back in the day, how do you think they can find their voices back in today's society, especially given how fast moving things are and how quickly our attention spans tend to move past things of relevance?
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know if there's a good answer to that. The places that are forgotten for a reason, and there we won't know who they are, who's forgotten because we've forgotten them, right?
Yeah,
There's lots of places that are left behind that we don't know where they are because they've been completely outside of our consciousness for years or decades or centuries. Um, and it takes some kind of act of God like this, or some other external force or some scandal or something to suddenly shine the light on a place, and then people start to think, hey, we have been coming here every year. We have been celebrating this thing. We have been draping this place with American flags and bringing all these politicians and celebrities here every year. What actually is the current scenario for people who live here? What is it really like for people who are on the ground? It takes a while for that to happen.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sekou, for such impactful and thoughtful work. We'll circle back to the questions in the Q&A at the end. But for now, I want to introduce our next speaker, Stacey Pennington.
Thanks, Joseph.
Okay, some Zoom glitches. Sorry about that. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Stacey Pennington. I'm a MUP from 2005 and a proud member of the GSD Alumni Council. And let me get going here. Let's see. Okay. I'd like to approach my presentation this morning actually as a personal story, as if we were all sitting around a fire having a fireside chat. And I think that relates very deeply to how personal all of our work is in the built environment. And to start by posing this question, how do we as practitioners in the built environment participate in the healing of the places left behind? I believe that land is not empty, that sites store memory, that energy does not disappear, it transforms. That activation is not creation, it is release. I'm very excited to present Maker's Quarter, a neighborhood in downtown San Diego, as a case study for places left behind. It is a reflection of an urban planning and community activation initiative that tried to disrupt conventional thinking about how to approach a multi-block developer-led master plan of an area that had been left behind, which is traditionally a rather top-down process and checks the boxes for outreach. For me, this part of downtown San Diego opened up the opportunity to connect my dots within, which have been so significantly influenced by my dad, Rob Lankford, and his real estate development company, Lankford Associates, who is responsible for some very stunning buildings throughout the West Coast of the United States. And ultimately, though, however, does represent the nature of the top-down approach of real estate development. Tremendous influence of my mom, Susan Madden Lankford, who spent many years on the streets with homeless, as well as in the jails and in juvenile hall, as the epitome of boots on the ground, hands-on connection with community, with a true interest in helping to or hoping to help and support. And of course, the influence of my time at the Graduate School of Design, and especially my professor, Margaret Crawford, and her book and her work regarding everyday urbanism, which forever changed the way that I would see the built environment. Shifting forward to 1999, right after I graduated from UCLA with an English degree, I had the chance to jump into the real estate world with my dad's company, Lankford Associates. And the first project that I worked on was Smart Corner, a very complicated transit-oriented development in East Village, and the subject of a lot of debate within our household, ultimately because of the conflict between the top-down and bottom-up approach. And I'd say that we didn't treat it the best, and to this day, the consequences and the ramifications still exist on this corner. I could give an entire lecture on that. On the other side of downtown San Diego, I had the chance to work with Lankford Associates, my dad, on Broadway 655, which was at that point in time the first new commercial office building in 10 years. My dad had a significant influence in instilling in me the importance of a strong downtown at the heart and soul of a strong region, and therefore the importance of maintaining a significant employment land use base to balance the coexistence of infrastructure, transit, mobility, access, with a broader vision for regional sustainability. And that's so critical in times, I think, over the eras of redevelopment when there's been an emphasis on residential, et cetera. The emphasis on office and jobs is essential. And so we were a really big part of resetting that table in downtown San Diego starting 25 plus years ago. So downtown San Diego is an extraordinary world-class city, like truly unparalleled. I encourage everyone to come and visit. So not only through the setting, the gorgeous setting of the bay, and the open space networks, but also the connection to infrastructure and mobility, our convention center, our tourism base, our parks and open spaces. It's really one of a kind. The evolution of growth in downtown for us really started in Little Italy and along the Marina District, ultimately to the Ballpark District, but did fall short of the Upper East Village, which is the site that I'm going to discuss. And it leads us to this 6-block area, which was owned by a local family, the Navarro family, who owns the Jerome's Furniture kind of business. And they had acquired these blocks over many, many years. And this was the subject of what became an RFP. I want to zoom out just for a second. This is the site of Maker's Quarter to just contextualize it with the kind of robust setting that we are surrounded by. And this framed so much about the vision and how we approached Maker's Quarter. So just around us are very diverse and rich and cultural neighborhoods like Barrio Logan, Golden Hill, South Park, and North Park, Hillcrest, Bankers Hill, and very importantly, just to the north of this Maker's Quarter footprint is the San Diego City College, which as we started underway, they had just transformed their campus, which had been a little bit of a bucolic kind of understated campus, through almost $300 million expansion with state-of-the-art new facilities. And that's been an essential part of the evolution of the neighborhood. But in the spirit of really like tracking how places do store memories and the iteration of the evolution of neighborhoods over time, I'm just going to zoom back a little bit to this photograph, the date not exactly known, but I'm thinking probably in the late 50s, where this is the outline of the properties that the Navarro family had accumulated over the years to support their growing furniture business. The layers and uses and meaning embedded into the area, going back to the 20th century, include a very strong presence of the automobile-related industry. And note this facade just for the future, as well as a very, very exciting role in the history of boxing and wrestling programs for all of Southern California at the Federal Athletic Club at the Coliseum. Eventually, the Jerome's furniture business outgrew and expanded to major regional operations around the city. And that brings us circa mid-90s, or I'm going to go ahead and jump to that, when we were started to become known or branded ourselves as America's finest city. The 90s is an interesting era in redevelopment, where not only was it paired with visions for redevelopment, but also the accumulation of a lack of investment in certain areas, and not only places left behind, but also people left behind. And here are a couple of photos from my mom's time with the homeless in her book, Downtown USA. And these were actually taken in the neighborhood of East Village and the surroundings. And here she is actually up in Balboa Park. So I'm going to jump ahead to 2011, and these were the existing conditions of the site that we are focused on. So more or less, they become a collection of storage uses, a couple printers, auto repair, and I don't want to underestimate, there were lives and businesses conducted and being lived in this area. Even the Derby dolls had a very strong kind of presence on the upstairs of one of the warehouses when we started our work. A key personal and career side note, I had the chance to work with Marty and Laura Burnett, Marty Poirier, both GSD alums, on the public open space implementation plan for downtown San Diego, which very much influenced my approach to open space and community altogether, and the commitment to never underestimate the complexities of thoughtful, authentic programming and activation. So the Navarro family had recognized the opportunity to spearhead the transformation of this area and issued a request for proposals to the development community, which this team, Lankford Associates, Phelps Development, and Portman Holdings, which I was involved in, were awarded the job together with the Idea District and a couple of very important visionaries. I'm going to just highlight that at this point of departure, there really are parallel paths, right? So you've got the development path that's overseeing all of the real estate and financing and entitlements and leasing efforts, et cetera, and the master planning path. And I think at this moment, I carved out what became a very important parallel path and track regarding human-centered design through the lens of interim activation. And it was based on the belief system that in this particular circumstance, and I think there are a lot of circumstances like this, sometimes the build it and they will come does not actually work. And sometimes setting the stage in a way that invites the community to participate and give us real-time feedback as to what they're yearning for just opens up so many opportunities. But just to honor the intensity of what happens on the side of the evolution of master planning and the real estate development, we were in around 2011 also studying all the various rather form-based approaches that we could take to this 6-block area through the leadership of Portman architects. And I'm just going to flow through these again, this presentation in itself. So fast forward to 2013, we were excited to launch our vision to the community, both within the real estate community and abroad, and go ahead and launch our activation vision and strategy. And this is the master plan as it stood at that point in time. The planning principles were very, very important to establish enhanced linkages, create a new employment hub, foster walkable, healthy lifestyle, and create authentic, dense, and sustainable space. The master plan evolved over the years, but the program always remained just around this, about 1 million square feet including 1 million square feet of office. And the vibe at this point of the vision is captured by these renderings dating back 12 or so years ago, which takes me to this part of the strategy. So to 2013, we were ready to kick off the tactical urbanism, which was informed by the past, the maker movement, the value of craft and art, and the premise that we believed everyone is a maker. And we started by transforming this blank wall along F Street, which is basically the off-ramp of the 94 coming into downtown, into a photographic mural installation, hoping to cause or present an opportunity for people to pause and reflect and connect with the site in a different way. And at that same time, we also transformed this warehouse along E Street into a vibrant mural installation that was curated by Christopher Konecki and posed the question, does the community yearn for a stronger connection with artists? This is the event where we actually launched the vision and the master plan to the community. And it was, I guarantee you, the first time that many of these business folks had been in a space like this. And Todd Gloria there, who's now our mayor. But the point of it all was actually to open it up to the community without any advertising, just again to see what the interest was. And we used it as a chance to also install a parklet back in 2013. And we received the answer loud and clear. There was a tremendous interest in what we were up to. Over 1,500 attendees, and just the chance to elevate these 36 artists and kick off our vision and our footprint in the community. Just across the street, we tackled this existing underutilized vacant space and saw it as an opportunity to actually install downtown's first community garden. Working with our local nonprofit, Humane Smarts, we created Smarts Farm, which became an incredible example for how powerful tactical urbanism could be in the gradual evolution of a neighborhood as a form of engaging community and educating youth. Together with the nonprofit, we educated over 4,000 youth, had about 120 gardeners. The space became a space for both field trips, local chefs gardening, economic development tours, neighborhood meetings. We had created the Makers Quarter Neighborhood Association, as well as the neighboring nonprofit, who we'll highlight in a little bit, David's Harp, filming some of their first actual film production, which then became the launch pad for a very successful business unit, and connecting just a few blocks away to Smarts Cafe. So eventually the success started to evolve in the neighborhood, and we had to move Smarts Farm to make way for Block T, our first office building. But overall, it was a tremendous success. And next, we took on the transformation of Silo, which was an underutilized vacant space just across the street, and turned it into a community venue that was multiple, had very parallel paths operating at the same time. And I'm aware of my time, so I'm going to keep on moving forward pretty quickly here. But it was critical for economic development and tenant attraction. Every event and program lived multiple lives, both real and digital, tailored around collecting feedback from the community, but also opening the door for a conversation regarding future involvement in this neighborhood. It became the launch pad for so many of the artists, and led by Chris Konecki, who had curated Warehouse 1425, as well as Carly Ely and so many other 125 artists altogether. So the space also, as I mentioned, became a really important part of our tenant attraction strategy. We even collaborated with Google and Microsoft and National Geographic we referred to it as knocking on the back door to basically begin a conversation regarding what the future of this neighborhood would be. We collaborated with La Jolla Playhouse and produced a WOW production of El Henry, and hosted just so many different events for the community that would highlight the importance of makers, the importance of craft. Overall, before we even put a shovel in the ground, we engaged over 125,000 people and had a human-centered design kind of back end to track engagement and those ideas. Education is central to the future of downtown and the East Village, and we were a proud part of helping to launch Urban Discovery Academy and to becoming home of Fab Lab, a very important nonprofit in the neighborhood focused on educating youth, and interim transformations of the existing warehouse spaces at that time, as well as a hub for innovation, in this case, Fuse Integration, and a destination for groups like Brookings Institute who were interested in our approach to innovation. We ended up being featured quite a bit in some very noteworthy publications, ultimately all to lead to the eventual development of the neighborhood, beginning first with our mixed-use residential project, Broadstone, and then our first office designed by B&IM, which learned from a bunch of the experimentation that we had done at Silo and was the first LEED ND Platinum office building in downtown San Diego. We opened up our first brewery, 10 Barrel, and successfully transformed the Coliseum into Punch Bowl Social. And these were all the plans heading into COVID that thankfully came underway just in the nick of time. We celebrated the transformation of the Coliseum into Punch Bowl Social as a form of being able to promote Block D as well. But by honoring the actual space and revitalizing it for the first time in about 3 or 4 decades, and for the last time ever, back to its use as a boxing arena. It was an incredibly special night, and it was a night that we could also honor Archie Moore's son, Billy Moore, and his nonprofit ABC Youth Foundation. Throughout all of this, my kids were involved and right there with me, and is really a family endeavor. And so then we successfully broke ground on Block D, our first office building. And I am running out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and keep on moving quickly. So here was where we ended up with our master plan at around 2016. At this point in time, the team had evolved. And ultimately, we were able to complete many of these projects pre-COVID. And there were still a couple of projects, though, that were planned, but not underway. And transitions were happening quickly, including the Silo moving, and the Silo space is actually it's a vacant lot right now at this point. COVID happening, people having to get very, very creative, and just a pause of reflection about like, what have we been able to achieve in this neighborhood, and what is the future for our mission. which led to this reflection and point of awareness. Silo and Smarts Farm weren't just former uses, they were energetic fields. When Maker's Quarter was activated 13 years ago, it wasn't invention, it was ignition. The energy radiated because something was already there. Our responsibility as practitioners in the built environment may not be to impose vision, but to listen, to sense what is stored, and to steward its release. And so these are snapshots of the neighborhood today. And that's that facade that we were able to integrate, and an indication of the setting kind of within the broader downtown San Diego. Broadstone Makers Quarter, its incredible artistry that was influenced by our attention and detail and the commitment to makers. And the architecture of Block D, this office building, was stunningly incorporated all the lessons that we learned through all of our experimentation at Silo and Smarts Farm. And ultimately, it really does come down to the people here, Chris and Carly, who are actually engaged in their to get married, and their careers have really taken off in such an exciting way. Lizzie Broughton, who operates her hair salon tailored on the ground floor of Block D, but is also launching so much more than a hair salon. She's transformed that space into both sonic sanctuary, but also into Sneaky Fox Records, and is programming it in a way that is inspiring community, connection, collaboration, and truly the essence of the arts community within this neighborhood. And just across the way is Sophia with a Black and Gray Atelier. Sophia Culpepper is just a force in her own right. She is very strong and bold about the importance of following her intuition and pursuing dreams in the face of so many different challenges that present themselves in urban environments, especially amidst post-COVID. Ground floor of Block D, now we've got Relic, these incredible bakers line around the corner for good reason. That's worth waiting for, and just an incredible part of the community. And then just across the way, David's Heart Foundation, who I showed a picture of earlier in the farm. And Brandon Stepp, the founder, is transforming so many lives within the footprint of this community. And it's soul-driven work that it just cannot be overstated. So I'd like to conclude with that. It's been a delight to be here this morning. I'm sorry I've gone over my time just a little bit. Behind the scenes of all these experiments and activations is a team that has worked tirelessly to pull it all together. And I'd just like to encourage all of us as urban planners and practitioners in the environment, in the built environment, to let's go on a listening campaign. Let's listen to ourselves, to each other, to the community, and let's listen to the land. And that was thank you.
Stacey, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for such a personal story and a personal sort of telling of the history of public space and the making and transforming of public space. In the interest of making sure that we get to our third speaker and leave plenty of time for conversation with folks afterward, I just want to ask two questions, sort of rhetorically for now, but we can also circle back to them. So something that seems to stand out in your work and in your presentation is agency. Certainly, it seems very central to the processes you're looking at and working through, and sort of even the way that you talk through the presentation of what has happened is so tied up in the agency of those who are there. So I want to ask two questions connected to that. The first one has to do generally with the term left behind, places left behind. Something I think we can all reflect on during this set of presentations is like how that term is useful, how it might be harmful. It can acknowledge harm, certainly. It could also emphasize otherness or hierarchy, but it can also catalyze change. And I think we're seeing combinations of those, throughout the day to day. So I just want to put that on the table for everyone to consider. about sort of our language around these types of projects. And then second, you've got this sort of tension, this wonderful tension of collective work and then authored work in your presentation, and thinking about how agency asserts itself from the side of the collective and the local versus that of maybe the expert and the designer. And maybe another helpful tension to think about that you that I think you touched on, but maybe not as much, is this idea of when do we construct a framework and when do we deconstruct barriers? Because you talk a lot about latent potential. So maybe that's something we could loop back to later.
Yeah.
Thinking about, I think we talk a lot about how you deal with collectivity versus authorship in the profession, but I think this idea of deconstructing the issues, the barriers in the way of people, and then constructing frameworks for folks to assert their agency is something I feel like is maybe less discussed. I'd love to hear your take on that, but I'll have to wait and I'll
I
listen.
know.
I'll listen
I
for
know.
later. So with that, again, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Stacey.
Thank you, Samuel. Yeah.
Of course, and I just want to transition us now to Cal Brook. He will be presenting next.
Thanks. Thanks, Sam. Okay, can you see my screen okay? Thanks. So, just a quick introduction. I'm Cal Brook, an architect and planner and 1985 graduate from the urban design program. Today, I wanted to talk about a kind of practice case study, which is the Indigenous Design Studio. So this studio is a Canadian-based practice within Brook McElroy Architects, of which I'm a part. We're also landscape architects and urban designers and planners. And the genesis of the Indigenous Design Studio is centered around the concept of restoring Indigenous presence in the fabric of Canadian communities, addressing the question, how can the design professions of architecture, landscape, and planning make a meaningful contribution to truth and reconciliation? And I want to start just providing a bit of context. And I suspect some of this information is largely unknown because up until recently, certainly in North American schools, this history was not taught. But before contact, there was 30,000 years of indigenous settlement and stewardship of North America. And this image shows you the location of hundreds of different indigenous nations across the US and Canada. Just to put in context that timeline, the post-contact, post-European contact with North America represents less than 2% of this timeline of indigenous presence. Pre-contact, the indigenous population in North America was 17 million. But by the 1890s, that population had declined 98%. Some of this was caused in part by the introduction of disease from the old world, to which indigenous people had no immunity, but also more egregiously through government policy that was essentially genocidal. For instance, one dark event in the US history was the forced displacement of communities through the Trail of Tears in the 1830s, which this image shows, where people were forcibly displaced, 81,000 Native Americans having to walk thousands and thousands of miles, and some lost 50% of their populations during that march alone. Of course, the impacts of colonization are more than just genocide. For instance, in Canada, the residential school system resulted in 200,000 children forcibly stolen from their families and placed in schools designed to exterminate indigenous culture. Recently discovered as many as 25,000 children died and are buried in unmarked graves. This has just recently come to light in about the last 5 years and has caused, I think, a kind of existential reckoning in Canada. But the intergenerational trauma caused by the residential school system is unimaginable and widespread, compounding the marginalization of Indigenous people living in reserves and in urban areas. And so even though since the 1950s, the Indigenous population in North America has rebounded, these communities are faced with staggering inequity and disadvantages that are structural and institutionalized. As the data here demonstrates, child poverty rate amongst Indigenous children is 3 to 4 times that of non-Indigenous. Children are 16 times more likely to be in foster care. The suicide rate is 3 to 9 times that of non-Indigenous people, and the incarceration rate 10 times. In Canada, knowledge of this history and today's inequities is beginning to be more widespread as a result of a countrywide truth and reconciliation process. Which brings us to the question, and I think going to the idea of what is the agency of our professions? How do we heal those left behind? When we look at the fabric of our communities, the character of our public spaces, the expression of Indigenous culture is all but invisible. And so what does belonging look like if nothing of your culture, history, language, or art is visible within the public spaces of your community? How can you ever feel welcome there? Design, I believe, does have agency in this place, in this space, and in this particular case, the idea of restoring Indigenous presence through placekeeping, placemaking, and cultural reclamation throughout the fabric of our North American communities. And the word fabric is very important. This is about actually instilling Indigenous presence throughout the communities, not in just kind of one-off museums and cultural centers, but actually as part of the character of how we think about urban design. So quickly, I just want to run you through some of the work of the Indigenous Design Studio, and this was the first project undertaken about 12 years ago, which is on the shores of Lake Superior, an Indigenous gathering place that revived a kind of traditional form of construction using bent wood to create a space that is highly visible, frankly, within a city that has a lot of racial tensions, but finally giving prominence to this deep millennial culture. The work of the Indigenous Design Studio also focuses on getting Indigenous makers, craftspeople, builders involved in this process. So the Spirit Garden was actually built by local First Nations artisans, as well as integrating local artists and creating places of gathering, but also places of ceremony, which are so critical to Indigenous culture. This is an image of the First Nations High School graduation. So it's so great to see how these spaces are being embraced, not only by Indigenous people, but also by non-Indigenous people who finally have an opportunity to be immersed in this deep culture. So just a quick little story about that project. We undertook that project in 2009 as part of a master plan for the city of Thunder Bay. And there was a very intensive consultation process with local Indigenous communities. And there was a young architect who was still in school invited to these consultations. His name is Ryan Gorey, who actually heard the stories that came from elders during the workshops and was able to interpret those into form. So this project I've just shown you is entirely designed by him. Fast forward, he now is a partner in our firm and leads the Indigenous Design Studio. 20% of the staff in our practice are Indigenous. Some of these projects kind of focus on history. This one is an Iroquoian longhouse built on an archaeological site. Really interesting is through the engagement process with local elders, they definitely wanted the historical replication of this longhouse, but they insisted that on the inside it represented contemporary expressions of culture, so that I find our work with Indigenous folks is very, it is not a nostalgia project. It's all about embracing the future. We have done, through the Indigenous Design Studios, we work with a lot of post-secondary institutions who are trying to do something around this idea of truth and reconciliation by creating spaces that convey Indigenous culture, that support Indigenous students, but are also used by the community. So in this college, this is centered in the main quad. What I really find interesting about these spaces, which are a kind of hybrid of landscape architecture and architecture, but they are open, accessible. People feel comfortable using them from all backgrounds. So it is not seen as an Indigenous only space, a space that welcomes all, based on this idea of the inclusive circle, which is very key, I think, to Indigenous ways of being and knowing. This is another project working with an Indigenous elder who had an idea about taking the 7 grandfather teachings and correlating them to the 7 layers of the food forest. On the idea of fabric, this is a project currently under construction in the city of Toronto, which is to transform streets in the city based on engaging the Indigenous community to kind of rethink the character of streets as public spaces. And finally, this last project is the Thunder Bay Art Gallery, also near completion, which houses Canada's largest contemporary Indigenous art collection. Ryan, who I introduced you to, is a key part of the design of this project. And I think a great example of a kind of way of approaching design that is profound. In this case, he took a preliminary sketch of the gallery and spent time with the turtle shell doing a series of photographs based on a narrative of the turtle emerging from Lake Superior, traveling on the land on this site, and then re-emerging into the water. And so the shape and form, this kind of kinetic, dynamic, active architectural expression comes directly from Indigenous culture, but in a very contemporary way. To conclude, I just wanted to, I think that for me, there are kind of maybe four takeaways. One is just to say that I believe that design can help sort of foreground people who have been marginalized, in this case, Indigenous presence. Design can advance cultural reconnection, so the reclamation of language, ceremony, community ties, and spirituality are a critical factor in breaking this cycle of intergenerational trauma. As a non-Indigenous person, I've had to learn how to be an ally. And a key principle is that for Indigenous people, nothing should be done for them without them. So in this practice, we have Indigenous practitioners leading these processes, but supported by our entire studio. And then the idea of reciprocity is that we're taking something away from this, which is of such deep benefit. I believe reviving the agency of North America's founding peoples is a path for us all to restore balance in ethics, spirituality, community, and our existential relationship with the ecologies that make life possible. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pass it now over to Eden.
Hi, Cal. Thank you so much for your impactful presentation. I love how you spoke about using design as a means of cultural reclamation, generational reconciliation, as well as reweaving the urban fabric and just reconciliation between what has been done in the past and moving towards a better future. So I actually have two questions in one for you, asking from a student perspective. So for designers who are interested in this type of reconciliation and peace building work within the built environment, what are key factors that we should keep in mind, and what is our responsibility as designers?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of people interested in working in this space, there are so many marginalized communities, not just Indigenous, of course, but I think the best path is to actually just go out and meet people in the community and start to understand what their challenges are and build a kind of personal relationship where you're comfortable talking about these things um, from a place of, deep respect. Um, I find that kind of human connection is absolutely critical as opposed to institutional connections. Um, and every community is different. So there's this formula I've talked about. I shouldn't use the word formula. This kind of path I've talked about may not be the same for other communities. Um, and sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Yes, what is our responsibility as designers in this type of work?
Well, I believe that if you are looking for a career that is meaningful, that is not just transactional, um, that trying to target people who have been marginalized and disadvantaged and acting as an advocate um, is a very rewarding career. It's a tough one, and everybody makes mistakes along the way. I've made tons of mistakes in this space, but um, if you can build meaningful relationships with people who you're working with, I think it will work out.
Thank you so much, Cal. That was such an insightful and needed answer for students as well as different designers watching across the world. So now we will move on to answering some audience questions. If there are some questions that you have in mind after watching Cal's presentation, we will go ahead and answer those now in this session. I'll also invite my fellow student moderators, Joseph and Samuel, to ask a few questions.
Okay. I believe we had a question for Sekou at the earlier part of the presentation. One question was asking how likely is it that these changes will be made, and which ones are most likely, and is there any progress being made so far?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so the the funding was, it's sometimes it's a lot easier to get funding for studies and for planning than for implementation. So we had a lot of great funding for the first phase. The second phase, we had a lot of momentum to go through it and in it. I think there is still a lot of challenges on the ground in terms of internal organization, organizing between the funding organization, the PERC, the organization funded by the Melville Charitable Trust. They took on new leadership within like halfway through the process. So then priorities start to shift. So that's a long way of saying that, we're still at the same point of frustration where we do a lot of really impactful work, a lot of engagement with the community, deep listening, as we were talking about, Stacey pointed out, and really develop a plan that was built by the community. We really saw the community as the primary clients, not the city or the mayor or the funders. And we're very proud of the work that got done, and it did inspire some more ground activity. So they're still meeting, they're still engaging internally, they're still developing new ideas and strategies for moving some of these things forward. Some of the things we're engaged with, some of them we're not. PERC did bring on a new development partner to help look at the high level development strategies, but our specific implementation strategies have yet to move forward. We haven't been told that they're dead. It's just that we haven't seen the kind of urgency that we'd expect.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
I'd like to surface a question from the chat. Maybe actually two questions. I'll try to tie them together. I think they go nicely together, but we have one from Kolu Zigby for Stacey. And I'll read the question directly. Was there a racial demographic change that happened in San Diego prior to the project? And what was the impact on the unhoused population? The photos from the presentation include African American, seemingly unhoused folks. The more recent photos don't appear to include African Americans, with the exception of the boxing center. So that's a very specific question for Stacey. I want to tie it to a general question from Nadir Al-Lausin, which is related to changes across time and measuring it. So they ask, I'd be really interested in hearing more about how impact is defined / measured, especially in the context of quote unquote left behind, which implies time. I'm also curious to hear the perspective on whether impact is measured and considered in terms of outcomes or processes, noting that they are not mutually exclusive. So I think there's a specific question for Stacey, but then also a more general question about time and metrics that anyone could jump on.
That is, yeah, very robust framing, Samuel, and thank you for the question from the audience. I think it's very fair to say that East Village and downtown San Diego more broadly have gone through multiple demographic and economic shifts over several decades, long before Maker's Quarter began. We have historically downtown really, really struggled with the homeless issue, and it's also something that we have a lot of robust kind of commitment to through the layers of civic organizations and the politicians and the state legislation, et cetera. I think we reckon with the reality that it's truly a regional housing shortage issue. I think the comment about the nature of the unhoused community when my mom was doing her work through Downtown USA and spending so much time on the streets with this community are quite different than the nature of the unhoused and the homeless issues that we're seeing right now. I can speak to that very directly regarding downtown San Diego. I can't necessarily regarding other regions. I think the correlation of the role of African Americans and as it was represented in my deck is not necessarily indicative of any broader pattern per se demographically as well. I think Brandon Stepp and his incredible work with the David's Heart Foundation is absolutely essential to that, and that may have been missed as I was zooming through at 100 miles per hour at the end of my presentation. So I hope that helps address some of those comments. I do. I think the term places left behind, I'm so glad people are picking up on the friction of it. It's on the one hand somewhat nostalgic. It's on the other hand somewhat problematic. And I think that's I was a part of the group that kind of reckoned with this topic and was co-chair of the first series of Places Left Behind. And that was by design, I gotta say, like par for the course with the GSD. The complexity of it is intended, and the undertone of my emphasis on the power of memory and the power of the land and how that ties into Sekou and Cal's presentations, I think is also very thoughtful and intentional.
Samuel, can I just jump on Nadir's question
Please, yes.
about impact? How do you define or measure it? And one way for our practice and the Indigenous Design Studio. So in Canada, there when we started this work about 15 years ago, there were probably 12 registered Indigenous architects. By population, that should have been 350. So through the hiring of young interns, we've probably had about 25 Indigenous interns, some of whom have stayed and some of whom have gone on, but many who have become registered architects within our practice. We actually are part of an organization called the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business, which has a program called Progressive Aboriginal Relations, which we've been part of, which actually forces us to measure things like the percentage cohort of Indigenous practitioners, how they've progressed in seniority through the firm, how we procure services from other Indigenous businesses, how we support communities philanthropically or through donations. And we are third-party audited every 3 years in order to maintain that designation. So it's a very interestingly kind of a data-driven, rigorous system for measuring impact. Of course, that's not, at the end of the day, the impact is how have you changed how have you changed life for those people left behind? That is much harder to measure. But I think anecdotally, we can see that things are shifting positively.
I want to say something quickly about time as well, because it's probably one of the basic threads that connect our three presentations. And in the example that we saw from Selma, it's like people want to leave some of that history behind and move forward. And this idea of let's just move forward, let's forget, let's move forward means that there's nothing really to move forward to unless you have a sense of where you're coming from. And this is where there's a famous Marcus Garvey quote about people without knowledge of their history don't really have a sense of direction or know where they're going to. So I think Cal's Longhouse project is a great example of that. That the idea that it can look so indigenously driven and authentic to the past from the outside, but then the inside is moving the moving things forward is the attitude that I think we all need to take. That we can't forget these histories. We have to bring them forward into the future, but we can't stay in those histories either and get mired in the weight of all those dark times.
Yeah, thank you so much to all the speakers who just contributed to that question. One of our last question is a general question for all speakers. I'll just read it from the chat. It's from Elizabeth Cohen. It is understood that working with community is crucial, but community is complicated and not just one entity. There are multiple voices and interests. How do you guys deal with that complexity?
Well, I can start in reflecting on some of the work that we did in Selma. It was really an opportunity for me personally to walk the walk of some of the things that I've been saying for a long time, that we need to have community empowerment instead of just community engagement, because community engagement is usually a kind of hands, arm's length distance process. And it's not very empowering all the time. It's more something that architects now have to do to check boxes, or developers have to do to check boxes in their process. But the way that we understand and define community, the way we achieve that is that we didn't define community, right? We actually completely empowered the local organizations, the local leadership to define who their communities are and to engage and do all the engagement work. We didn't come in as experts feeling like we knew more than everyone else. The only people who are experts are the people who are local, the people who have lived that life. And so our tactic is always to go to where the organization is already happening instead of trying to create organization from scratch. And that has proven very effective on this project and other projects that we've been involved with.
Yeah, I'll echo that from my experience as well. My team's kind of vision and commitment is to elevate existing resources and organizations, to never duplicate or try to create redundancy there. The vision and commitment with Makers Quarter was to use these different scales of space, whether it was Smarts Farm or Silo or 1425, to encourage all points of view to come to us and vice versa, so that we could give a form and expression and opportunity to connect with the neighborhood. And for these, what I didn't get a chance to show is the digital representation online. Everything lived two versions, the real life and then the online life. And we wanted to give a portal and a launch pad for expressing the richness and the tapestry of this extraordinary community that we were in. I think one of my big points of view that I didn't have a chance to really highlight is, unfortunately, right now, there has been a disconnect between the urban planning and design professions and real estate development. And what I strongly believe in is that there doesn't have to be moving forward. And I think there's another very good question about the potential overlap of presenters and presentations. And Cal and I particularly, we really synergized regarding our shared belief system. But that's also been my way of reckoning with and healing on my own about the layers of frustration and disappointment that can happen despite best intentions in the built environment, in a world that is so incredibly finance oriented, where ultimately banks and deal structures are shifting and what I'll call fiscalizing land use and community. So it's a great question, very, very complex, and begs for a much bigger discussion, I think.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for a really great and engaging conversation. I really hope that the guests have also enjoyed a lot of the things that have been shared and can help us in our journeys to be good impacts and voices within our communities as well. Next, we'll hand it over to Zeerak to give some closing remarks and send us home. Thank you.
Thanks all. I'd just like to echo my thanks to Cal, Stacey, Sekou for sharing the stories of your work, and to Eden, Joseph, and Sam for helping lead the discussion. I hope these stories from Selma, from San Diego, and from Indigenous communities in Canada inspire your design work. The reason we run this series that we call Design Impact is just to highlight the social impact that our work, the work of our discipline, can have on the communities around us. We've been running this Places Left Behind series in particular because we feel that development of all kinds is asymmetric in the world. And there are things that we can do in our discipline with our colleagues and with our students and with our teachers that can help rebalance some of how design impacts the world. We hope these stories are inspiring for you. We hope to share more. And if you have feedback or questions or suggestions, please do send them our way. We'd love to hear them. Thank you very much for joining us today.